Thank you for joining us for our webinar today on Mastering Your Written Project Report with presentation and questioning. So we'll start off with some introductions. My name is Kayleigh Watson and I'm a Senior Product Owner with DSW.
Hi, and I'm Danielle Taylor and I am a Quality Executive here at DSW.
So just a little bit about DSW firstly. So DSW have got over 25 years experience in the learning and development space. And to date, we've delivered endpoint assessment to over 16,000 individual apprentices, and we work closely with over 200 training providers. So in the webinar today, we're going to be looking at selecting a project, defining the scope, the project report, the presentation, the questions, and at the end, we have a whole host of resources that have been designed to support you through this assessment method. So for the written project report and questioning, we are seeing this as becoming an increasingly popular assessment method for many new standards. This includes, but definitely isn't limited to, team leader, operations manager, associate project manager, compliance and risk, and senior people professional. There's also many other standards out there as well, where you may have to do a project or a presentation, and hopefully a lot of the things that we're going to go through today will also help with those methods as well. So the purpose and the requirements for this assessment method can be different per standard. So it's well worth having a look at the toolkit for your standard to find out what those specific requirements are. And your toolkit is available from your training provider. But as I said, the webinar today is going to go through the common principles which will apply to everyone. So the first stage is to select your project. So you'll be working with your training provider and your employer to select an appropriate project. And in that project, it should give you the opportunity to showcase the knowledge, skills and behaviours that you've been developing throughout your apprenticeship programme. It's also an opportunity to bring real benefit and value to organisation as well. So the first thing we need to look at is what is the purpose of your project? Is it something that you need to implement? Or are you looking to find a solution to an issue or explore a new idea or opportunity that will enable you to draw some conclusions, make recommendations, and then implement at some point in the future? It's also important to look at the key themes as well. So a lot of the common ones that we see are things like data collection and analysis, liaising and working with different stakeholders, and then also what past descriptors need to be met. And also if you're aiming for distinction, then what the distinction descriptors are that need to be met. At the bottom of this slide, we have got some useful resources. So first up is the amplification. So we have amplification within every single one of our toolkits. And what the amplification is designed to do is to take each pass and distinction descriptor and then break that down to show exactly what is required to be able to meet each one of those. We also have project guidance documents, and they guide you through from initially selecting your project, planning your project, carrying out your project activity, and then writing your report and developing your presentation. So just looking a little bit more at the at some of the key themes, these are some of the common ones that we tend to see. So we've got the key themes shown on this slide, and we've then broken those down into some prompt questions, which are then linked to some of the descriptors. So you can use this with your employer and your training provider to really scope out your project and support you in planning your project. So if, for example, one of the key themes is data, you can start to look at where can you collect that data from, how will you collect it, and what is it that you're hoping to find from that. You might need to look at your organisation's policies and procedures. So you'll be looking at which policies and procedures are relevant to your problem statement or relevant to the topic of your report. And another example on there is stakeholders. So what stakeholders are going to be impacted by the work that you're doing on your project, and which stakeholders will you need to engage with during your project? So as we say, these requirements, these key themes, there may be different for the project on the standard that you're doing. So it's really important to look at that amplification document to see exactly what's in there and exactly what it is that you need to be demonstrating through this assessment method. And also that project guidance, which will help break that down for you a little bit more as well. So once you've identified what your project's going to be based around, we then need to look at defining the scope of that project. And this is around detailing how you intend to demonstrate each one of those descriptors. It's also about outlining the key activities that you'll need to do as part of your project. So essentially, what things are you going to do to meet the aims and objectives to really run through your project? You might find it helpful to set yourself some deadlines for each of those activities. And also planning time as well to write your project report and prepare your presentation materials to ensure you have got plenty of time to write that out, go through and check it, and make sure you've got everything in there that's needed. So for quite a lot of standards, DSW do provide templates for you to be able to detail the scope of your project. This is usually a 500-word summary on your project, and that's to show your IEPA or your independent endpoint assessor how you intend to demonstrate those descriptors, so essentially what you're going to do. And within that, you might also wish to include your timescales as well, just to show that all that project activity is achievable within the given timescales. So many of these templates also allow you to make notes as well against each of the descriptors. It's a little bit cheeky, but this isn't actually included in the word count. So it's actually a good way to give more information and more context to your independent endpoint assessor when they're looking at your scope. And before starting your project, it's really important to read and digest the feedback that's given by the IEPA. So in most cases, they will be reading the scope and giving you feedback on that. Danielle, are you able to give us a little bit more information about the types of feedback that's provided?
Absolutely, yeah. So the type of feedback that you tend to get from your IEPA will be something along the lines of letting you know whether the project scope will look at being able to meet the KSBs and the learning outcomes that you're working towards. And they'll probably give you a little bit of feedback around the project itself, but without being too developmental, so without giving you all the answers, because obviously we don't want to give you everything. But we will obviously give you a little bit of feedback on whether we think the project will be suitable and meet the KSBs, and that's mainly the type of feedback that you'll be looking for. So yes, as Kayleigh said, it's very important to read that feedback from your IEPA because that will then assist you on the next stage of actually going ahead with that project.
That's great, thanks for that, Danielle. So again, at the bottom of this slide, we also have some useful resources that will support you during this stage. So we have the amplification document there again, and we've also got the template. So sometimes you might find this is called a project title and scope. Sometimes it might be a project summary template. Sometimes it might be a project plan. That can differ depending on the standard. So please refer to the toolkit and it'll give you all the information about that is relevant to your standard. Okay, so we'll move on now to look at the project report. So in this project report, you're going to demonstrate how you've met the aims and objectives of your project and what the outcomes were. For some projects, you may have to include certain headings or certain sections. So it is important to look at those, but you can always use your own headings and subheadings as well. We have found that sometimes people find it a little bit easier to break the project down into more manageable chunks and then to work on one section at a time. In line with that, you might also want to allocate a word count to each of those sections just to help to keep you on track. It's important to remember that these project reports do have a maximum word count. And if you go over that maximum word count, anything over that will not be assessed. It's also good to go back and make sure that you're targeting every single part of the descriptor. So that's all of the past descriptors and the distinction ones if you are aiming for a distinction. And also to consider the command verbs within those descriptors as well. So your command verbs are things like analyse, describe and evaluate. So it's really important that you are bearing those in mind and making sure if it's asking you to analyse, then you have carried out that analysis, for example. You can also make use of appendices as well to show the assessor exactly what it is that you've done. So for example, if you've been in a meeting, you may choose to include the meeting notes. If you're using systems, you may wish to include screenshots, things like photographs, email chains, anything at all that supports the work that you've done. You do need to be aware of as well of what is and isn't included within that word count. Sometimes this can catch people out. So really make yourself familiar with that and keep track of that word count. And then also to make sure that you are referencing any original authors. We don't mandate one sort of set way of referencing those. We just need to make sure that it's clear that if it is somebody else's work, then we are giving credit to that original author. So in writing your project report, then it is important to go back and look at the amplification to make sure that you are meeting and demonstrating each part of every descriptor. We've also got a referencing table as well, and the purpose of the referencing table is to map your project report and any of the appendices that supporting documentation to each one of the descriptors. It's also a helpful tool where you can actually RAG rate yourself against each descriptor. So you can look at, have you met the full descriptor? How well have you met it? And do you have strong evidence for that? And then finally, we have the evidence requirements document. Danielle, are you able to give us a little bit more information about that document?
Absolutely, yeah. So DSW have an evidence requirements document that your training provider will be able to provide to you directly from our system EPA Pro. So if you haven't already reviewed that, then please go ahead and ask your training provider and they will be able to provide you a copy with that. So basically that document gives you a full breakdown on what to include in your project in terms of the evidence and making sure that it meets the BARCS principles. So that means validity, authenticity, reliability, currency and sufficiency. So that gives a full breakdown around the BARCS principles and what that means. So an example for that one would be for currency. We need to make sure that all your evidence that you're providing is dated. It's extremely important because we need to make sure that the project meets the requirements in the toolkit in terms of the timelines. So an example could be that if you've got a project where the toolkit states it has to be completed after gateway, then the dating of the evidence will allow you to confirm that and allows us to check that that project was indeed completed as per the toolkit requirements. There's also more information around mapping. So when you're including the referencing tables, how to map your evidence alongside the learning outcomes or the KSBs, and basically just some tips and tricks on how to clearly map over that evidence. It gives a full breakdown around the evidence type. So there's three main types of evidence that you need to concentrate on. So you've got your anecdotal evidence, which is basically a full rundown of the evidence that you're providing in written format. The anecdotal evidence should always be backed up by either product or performance evidence. So the product evidence could include screenshots of emails that's taken place. It could be anything from meeting minutes that you're providing, that kind of thing. So depending on the anecdotal evidence depends on the product evidence that you're also providing. There's also your full breakdown of the reports that you can create, that kind of thing. If you're wanting to include witness testimonies, which is a really useful piece of information, piece of evidence, sorry, to include alongside your anecdotal, because it's basically somebody else validating the evidence that you're providing to confirm that it actually took place. Signatures gives a full breakdown of them. Any recordings, so if you're wanting to include professional discussions, it gives you a bit more information around there. With a little bit of information towards the end around malpractice, maladministration and your data protection. So redacting all the information that you're including. That's a really important piece of information to read up on. So yes, the document is available, like I said, on EPA Pro, which your training provider will have access to. So if you want a copy of that, I feel it'll be very, very useful to refer to when you're completing your project.
Okay, so now we've got some project report top tips. So these are things that our endpoint assessors are actually seeing within reports that actually perform very well at endpoint assessment. So first we have using the appendices to provide product evidence to give further context to what's in your report. So as we said before, you know, if you've had a meeting, include those meeting minutes and you can redact what you need to. If you've taken some raw evidence and analysed that, then it's a good idea to include that raw data within that appendices, as it does give that additional background and context to what you've written about within your report. So it's also important to write concisely and ensure that you've demonstrated every part of the descriptor. And then also to meet as much as you can through the project report, as this will then take the pressure off on the other components. So that'll take the pressure off during your presentation and during the questioning. So we'll move on now to the presentation. So there may be certain things that you need to include in your presentation, and these will be detailed within our toolkit. So the purpose of the presentation is to give an overview of your project and discuss any parts of the criteria that are best demonstrated verbally. So if you have struggled a little bit to get some points across within your project report, then you might choose to pick those up in your presentation and find it a little bit easier to talk about those. So stick to the key points, and then you can expand upon them within your speaker notes, just to make sure that your slides aren't too text heavy and aren't looking too busy. So define a clear structure at the start and try and stick to that, so your presentation will flow quite naturally. You can also use visuals as well to help you to demonstrate your points, and also use speaker notes as well to help to prompt you. But we do say to avoid using scripts if you can, as then your presentation can become a little bit wooden. You can practice delivering your presentation, so that might be to a friend, a family member, or to a colleague at work. And also time yourself as well to make sure that you are within those parameters. Focus on your content first, and then how the slides look. You are assessed on the presentation, so it's important that your content is really there, and then afterwards work on making them look really good to make sure that that time is used effectively. And then ahead of your live assessment, test out your equipment to make sure that everything's working properly. So, that can be things like making sure that your camera's working, that your microphone's working, and that you're able to share your screen. So now we've got some presentation top tips. So practice your presentation so you can manage your time effectively. If you don't have anyone who you can practice your presentation with, you could always look at recording yourself and then watching that back. Familiarise yourself with the platform that you'll be using and having a test run. So the usual platforms that we use are Microsoft Teams, Zoom and WebEx, and we will always book your live assessments on the one that you feel most comfortable with. It is really helpful though to present to someone else who can then give you feedback, such as your employer or your training provider. And then to make effective speaker notes to support you in delivering a natural presentation where you can show your passion for the work that you've done and the difference that you've made. As we said before, sometimes with the scripts, it can become a little bit wooden, and sometimes people can get a little bit bogged down if they do have quite a lot of notes. This is your project, you know what you're talking about, and we really want to see your passion for the work that you've done. And now we'll move on to the questioning. So the purpose of the questioning is to confirm and corroborate the evidence that the assessor has already seen within your project report and presentation. So we're looking at any bits that may be a little bit weaker, any bits that haven't yet seen evidence for, and to confirm that that work has been completed by yourself. It'll also be looking to target distinction criteria as well, if you have been seeking to demonstrate those. So all of the questions during this portion, it will be focused on the work that you've done as part of your project. So there's not going to be any surprises there at all. We also have some sample questions as well within our toolkit. These are just basically designed to show you how those questions will be formatted. So things like how long the question will be and how these might be worded. And then again at the bottom, we do have useful resources. So we have the conditions for live assessment.
Yes, so the conditions for live assessment document, again, you can request a copy of this from your training provider, as this will be on our system EPA Pro. So this gives you a full breakdown really of what to expect for your live assessment, including the rules around the housekeeping, the conditions that need to be set. But the main points that I'd like to just focus on today is basically the most important bits of information. So before you join the live assessment, just make sure that your camera and your microphone's working, because then that will just alleviate any technical issues that do happen on the day of the live assessment. And just make sure that you have tested that you can share your screen while you're on the call as well, because you'll be sharing your screen throughout the whole of the assessment and not just for the presentation. So you just need to make sure that that's working okay. And that includes when you're sharing your desktop for the Q&A part, you need to make sure that you can show the toolbar at the bottom of your screen as well. Make sure you bring valid and in-date identification. So it must contain a photograph, it has to be in date, and your full name on there as well. You must be alone in a private room, so you can't be with anybody else unless it's a panel interview or Q&A. Then you can be in the room with the other person that's on the panel, but most of the time we ask that you're in a private closed room on your own without interruption. And you will be asked to do a full 360-degree pan of the room just to confirm that you are alone. And make sure that as well you've only got one screen during the live assessment, so you are permitted to have 2 screens during the presentation, but then the IEPA will request that you turn off that second screen before the Q&A starts. There are other tips and pieces of information that you can find on the document. We'll give you a full rundown, including all the other bits and pieces that will be included. But by all means, please feel free to ask your training provider for any clarity on any of the points if you're not sure.
Now we've just got some top tips for those live assessments. So make sure that you are reading the conditions for live assessment and ensure that you do fully understand those conditions. If there's anything that you don't understand, then please ask those questions beforehand. And then test out your equipment to ensure that you don't have any issues on the day. So again, your camera, your microphone, ensuring you can share your screen. If you're using a laptop, making sure that it's charged up and things like that. And then also on the day to be live assessment, dress appropriately and plan your day so that you're not feeling rushed. So, you know, beforehand, make sure you've had a bite to eat, make sure you've had a drink. And in terms of dressing appropriately, we're not asking everybody to be all suited and booted. You know, smart casual is absolutely fine, but sometimes when you do dress up a little bit, it can make you feel a little bit more confident. And obviously make sure that you are feeling comfortable as well. So, you know, don't be digging out your best pair of trousers that are going to be digging into your side throughout the entire assessment. You do need to make sure that obviously you are comfortable throughout. And then here we have got some of those resources that might help you throughout not only this assessment method, but also endpoint assessment as well. So we have our toolkit, and this provides all the information around your endpoint assessment, all of the requirements, timings, and everything like that. We have the amplification, which breaks down each one of those pass and distinction descriptors and shows exactly what it is that you need to demonstrate to be able to meet each one of those. We do have some templates available for some of the standards as well, so we can make use of that where we need to. We have the project guidance, which goes through step by step from looking at what you're going to base your project on, what topic you're going to use, defining the scope, planning your project activities, and writing up your project report. We've got the evidence requirements that make sure that the evidence that you are submitting to support your project is going to be accepted and everything is dated, everything's in line there. We have the conditions for live assessment. That's just going to make sure that you are ready for those live assessments. You've got everything that you need ahead of that. We've also got MS Teams, WebEx and Zoom user guides. So if you are a little bit unfamiliar with the system, so for example, if you do use Microsoft Teams for work, but you don't really use the screen sharing function, then these guides will show you exactly how you use that. We've also got a whole host of videos on our YouTube channel. So we have just pointed out a couple here. So we have Get Ready for EPA Tips for the Day of Assessment, and also preparing for discussions and interviews, as that might help with the questioning portion. And there's also probably quite a few of you who will be required to do a professional discussion or an interview as part of your endpoint assessment. We have absolutely loads of videos on our YouTube channel, so it's well worth having a look at those and seeing if any of those pique your interest and might be helpful. So I think that's everything from us. Now, Danielle has been keeping an eye on the chat and on some of the questions that have been submitted. So we'll try and get through as many of those as we can now. If we do miss any though, we will look to pull something together and send that out afterwards.
Yep, so I'm just going to run through a couple of the questions that have come through. So thank you everybody for sending the questions through the Q&A part. So I'll do a quick run through now and we will see how many we can get through. And like Kayleigh said, if we can't get through them all, we will provide something at the end so we can try and answer everybody's questions. So we do have a question around the slides. So apologies if this was missed at the beginning. So yes, the slides will be shared after this webinar today. Kayleigh, can you perhaps just confirm how the slides will be shared?
I'm not 100% sure, to be honest. It is one of our colleagues who will be sending those out, but we will be sharing the slides, and then this video will also be available on our YouTube channel as well within the next probably the next couple of weeks.
Fantastic. We have a couple questions as well, just around the project scope, and then what if they get the feedback from the IEPA saying that the project isn't suitable. So basically what happens is you don't have to go back and do a whole new project. What you just need to do is just work with your employer and your training provider to revisit the project scope and just have a look at the case fees and the IEPA feedback on how you can improve the scope and the project itself to then go ahead and meet those case fees. Like I said, have a look at the documents, the supporting documents that we've gone through today, take on those tips and yeah, the feedback from the IEPA, and then you should be able to then resubmit and hopefully go through to the next stage.
Yeah, and I wouldn't take it as a negative either if you do submit a project scope and that isn't approved by the endpoint assessor. It is an opportunity to get feedback, and it is going to also set you up for success as well with the assessment method. So if it is rejected, please don't take it to heart. It happens. It's just an opportunity to go back, refine and tweak what you're doing. And obviously to take that forward and use that in your assessment.
Yeah, so there's a couple of questions around accessing the actual documentation itself. So like I said, you will be able to get that through your training provider. So if you just contact your training provider, they have access to our system, EPA Pro, and all the guidance documents that we've mentioned today, the amplification, the toolkits, the live assessment conditions, the evidence requirements documents, they're all provided in EPA Pro. So your training provider will be able to provide you with all those documentation.
Yeah, for each standard, we do produce a toolkit, and within that toolkit, we have a lot of embedded documents, which is essentially everything that you'll need for that standard, such as our amplification, our project requirements documents, your referencing tables, everything that you'll need. So if you make sure that you have got the toolkit for your standard, and then you'll have access to all of those documents.
So a couple of questions around providing screenshots for the appendix as the product and performance evidence. Would that be included in the word count? So the screenshots will not be included in the word count, so you're absolutely fine there. Same with embedded documentation as appendix, they won't be counted in the word count. So the main anecdotal evidence, that is what is included in the word count for your project.
Yeah, so it'll be the main body of the report, and then it's usually things like headings and subheadings will also be included, but things like any references, any appendices, anything like that won't be included. But within the project guidance document, it will give you a list of exactly what is included and what isn't included.
Couple of questions around the length of the presentations. Do they all have questions and answers afterwards? So the timings for the presentation will be standard specific. So if you have a look at the toolkits, it gives you a full breakdown on the length of the presentation, the length of the question and answer sessions afterwards, and just basically what actual assessments are included in the standard that you're completing for your apprenticeship. So please do take a look at that toolkit because it gives you everything you need in there.
Yeah, usually what we see is the presentations on most standards, they usually last between 50 and 30 minutes. There are some standards where there is a strict cut-off point, which gives you a maximum time. Sometimes it might say something like it'll be typically 20 minutes. So obviously have a read of that and make sure you know what those parameters are. Have a practice beforehand and then make sure that you are sticking to those parameters.
So we've got a couple of questions around the use of a script for the presentation, and are you penalised for using a script? Absolutely not. If you would prefer to use a script, then please do feel free to go ahead and using one. I know some people might prefer just to have it all written down already. It was just a good recommendation of having prompt notes, because then it allows you to flow freely working through your presentation. But if you do prefer to use a script, then you will definitely not be penalised for doing so. A couple more standard specific ones. So again, just to repeat, just to, make sure you check the toolkit, and that will give you further information around there. If not, then just drop a question to your training provider. If they're not aware of any of the answers as well, they will get in touch with DSW directly, and we can provide further information that way. Just scrolling down the questions. Okay, so we've got a question here around presentations and how they're actually delivered. So all will be delivered remotely through the live assessment. So that will be either Teams, Zoom, or WebEx. You'll share your screen with the IEPA during the live assessment, and that's how you present your presentation. We don't do face-to-face in-person live assessments. They're all held remotely through Teams, Zoom, or WebEx.
I think we have had a couple of occasions where it has been requested in certain circumstances. However, there can be additional costs that are associated with that. So if there are any reasons why you are needing a face-to-face assessment, then please discuss that with your employer and training provider, and we will be happy to look into that.
A really good question here around what type of identification is accepted. So the main ones that we usually focus on, we've got three that we tend to focus on the most, which is your driver's license, your passport, or a work ID, a photographic work ID. Those three documents have to be valid and in date, and must contain your photograph and your name that is on the system when you're registered for the apprenticeship, just for that validation.
Yeah, and for the driving licence, that can be a full licence, but we can accept provisional licences as well.
So there's a question around who they actually present to. So this again can be standard specific. Most of the time it'll just be to your IEPA, so your assessor. But if you're on a standard that does have a panel, so you could include the training provider and the employer as well. But again, this just depends on the standard. So I would double check in your toolkit, and it will provide you with that full information on who will be present during that live assessment. Question around having notes available during the questioning. So most of our standards allow you to bring notes in to support you through the live assessment. If it does differ, it will make that very clear in the toolkit. So just double check in there. But most of our standards do allow you to bring notes to your live assessments. So we've got a couple around again, just how long the live assessment takes. So again, just double checking your toolkit. It provides the full breakdown of the timings in there. We do say as well, we allow a couple of minutes at the start before your live assessment actually takes place when you join that call, just to go through the live assessment conditions, just to set the scene as well, to go through any housekeeping. The IEPA will play you a short video at the beginning as well, just to basically outline all those assessment conditions, and give you that chance to ask any questions before the live assessment actually goes straight ahead. So don't worry, we can start it within your own time during that call, and you can take a couple of minutes to focus yourself before the live assessment goes straight ahead.
Yeah, the assessor will also take some time as well to introduce themselves and a little bit about their background, because they are all experts within the sectors and within the areas that you guys are doing your apprenticeships in. They also might engage in a little bit of small talk with you, particularly if you do appear to be quite nervous. It is really, really common to be nervous during these assessments, but there really is nothing to worry about.
So there's a question here around having two screens. If you only have a laptop, absolutely fine, you know, go ahead and just use that one laptop. You don't have to use two screens to do the presentation. But if you do prefer having two screens while the presentation is going ahead, absolutely fine to do so as well, but that will need to be unplugged for the Q&A part of the assessment. So the two screens is only if you're doing the presentation and you prefer to have those two screens while you're presenting. Otherwise, the one laptop is absolutely fine. Just to clarify, yes, the webinar is being recorded and will be made available after the webinar has finished, along with the slides as well, and some more information around the question that we haven't managed to get around to today.
So we've got one about if your project needs to cover all of the KSBs or all of the descriptors. So it doesn't have to cover everything. For most of the standards, we do detail things that your presentation should cover. So that can be things like giving an overview of your project, and there might be some specific areas to focus on there as well. For the written project report with presentation and questioning assessment method, you do have opportunity to demonstrate the descriptors across all 3 components. So you don't have to demonstrate everything within all 3. It might be that you demonstrate or meet most of what you need to within the report. You can then pick up other bits within the presentation, and then you've also got the questioning there as well if we do have any bits that we still need evidence for.
Yeah, so we have a question around here about whether this is something that you can fail. So if there are some criteria that you haven't met through the live assessment, yes, the assessment can go down as a fail, and you will get that chance to have a resit, but that is something that you will need to discuss with your training provider and your employer before that is then rebooked in. So I would pick this up with your training provider and your employer to discuss should that actually happen. And you won't be penalised for, wanting to have another resit to have a go. Absolutely fine. It's just something you need to pick up with your training provider.
Yeah. On some standards, if you do fail an assessment method, the grade will be capped. So that'll mean then that the maximum that you can get is a pass. So that's something that is important to bear in mind. You also will need to resit the whole assessment method. So for the written project report with presentation and questions, you will need to resubmit your project report, redo your presentation, and then also have the questioning component as well. So you wouldn't be able to just do one of those components. It is a reset of the full assessment method.
We have a few questions around people getting a bit confused because their standard doesn't tend to have a presentation. That's absolutely fine. There are some standards that just have the project, and then there are some other standards that have the project and the presentation. So the presentation slides, that only is relevant to those standards that do have the presentation. So don't worry if you've got the information from your training provider about the standard you're completing that doesn't have a presentation. You won't be missing anything. But yeah, it's just standard specific basically. So we're just covering both in one go. So there's a question around whether we have any sample documents that we can share about the layout of a report. At the moment, it's quite difficult to provide sample documents because everybody's project is completely different. So one example could work for one person, but it might not work for all the other apprentices. So that's very difficult for us to be able to provide something like that. So instead, we provide the generic across the board guidance documents, which will then allow all apprentices to be able to meet the requirements if they follow those documents that we've mentioned today.
Yeah, so all the guidance documents that we provide, we're really looking to give you all the information that you need to identify a suitable project, because everyone is in such different job roles. They do such different work, as part of their roles. So we don't want anyone to kind of feel essentially boxed in a little bit by providing sort of exemplars or anything like that. We want to give you the freedom so you can best demonstrate and really showcase the knowledge, skills and behaviours that you've acquired during your apprenticeship.
So if there's any other questions, can you pop them into the Q&A section, and then we can maybe go through there. We'll give it a couple more minutes to see if any more questions come through. But all questions need to be posted into the Q&A section if that's possible, to allow us to be able to identify those.
So we do have some questions about the grading and the scoring. We would direct you back to the toolkit to get that information. We are seeing on most standards that to achieve a pass, you need to meet all of the pass descriptors. And for a distinction, you do need to meet all the pass and distinction descriptors. This can vary a little bit on some standards though. So always double check the toolkit to find out what those requirements are.
So do have a couple of standard specific questions around. So I would just go and have a look at the toolkit, speak to your training provider, because a lot of our standards are different. So it's quite difficult just to pinpoint specific answers. So have a look at your toolkit. If you've still got some concerns around the content, then let your training provider know, and then they can forward those over to DSWO to give a bit more information.
So we have had a question that's mentioned the use of AI. We actually have recently released our policy on using AI. That policy is available on our website, so that's dswlearning.co.uk. If you go to the download centre and policies and procedures, you'll be able to find that policy in there.
We do have a question around the presentation being delivered through the telephone. Unfortunately, we can't honour this because that will not then adhere to the live assessment conditions. The presentation has to be done through video conference, so Teams, Zoom or WebEx. The assessor must be able to see you at all times on the camera and be able to hear you at all times. And just to confirm as well, the mobile phone is not permitted through the live assessment.
So we do have a question about when the project is completed. Again, this can vary depending on your standard. We do have some where you can complete the project during the on-programme period, and we do have some that need to be completed during the endpoint assessment period. But again, if you refer to the toolkit, it'll give you all that information within there. So we have got a question about command verbs. So within our amplification documents, we do pull out that command verb and we do explain exactly what we mean by that command verb. So if, for example, we're asking you to analyse, then we will define what we mean by analyse. And the same for words like describe, evaluate, critically evaluate. So it's really important to familiarise yourself with that.
So we've still got a couple of questions coming through around where to find the toolkit. So your training provider will have access to our system called EPA Pro, and all the information, all these documents, including the toolkit, can be found on that website. So if you just speak to your training provider, they can provide this to you, they can print it off, or they can email it over to you. So you just need to liaise with them and they can access that for you.
So we have got a question about how the overall grade is calculated, what that's based on. So the overall grade is based on the assessment methods that you'll be doing as part of endpoint assessment. So you might do your written project report with presentation and questions, and then you might have one or two other assessment methods there as well. Again, our toolkit will be able to detail all of those for you.
And we have a question around what is actually included in the word count for the project report. So the word count tends to be the anecdotal evidence. So that's all your written evidence. And like Kayleigh said, the headers will also be included as well. What's not included in the word count is your screenshots and your attached appendix as the evidence to support that anecdotal. So basically any written form of evidence that's counted in your project is what's counted for the word document, for the word count, sorry. Give it another minute, see if any more questions come through in the Q&A section. So we've got a couple of questions around whether the project needs to be implemented or is it something that they're going to do. So again, this is standard specific. So have a look at your toolkit. It gives you full guidance on for that standard, whether it's something that has to be implemented or is it something that you're planning.
Yeah, so there will be some projects where you will be looking at implementing something, or it might be a project that is more of a consultative nature. So it's where you'll be investigating, it might be a common issue, recurring issue, or you might be exploring a new opportunity. And within that, you'll be gathering a lot of information and data, which you'll then be able to use to draw conclusions, to make recommendations. And then it might be that you then present that to your organisation to then be implemented in the future after you've completed your endpoint assessment. But again, if you have a look at our toolkit and the project guidance document specific to your standard, it'll explain that fully for you. Yep, so we've got a question about evidence and just confirmation that it's not included in the word count. So any supporting evidence will not be included within the word count.
So that includes screenshots, witness testimonies, attached appendices, that kind of thing. They're not included in the word count. It would just be the wording of the body of your project, which is classed as the anecdotal evidence that will be counted towards the word count.
And sometimes your headings and things like that are included as well. Again, it'll all be detailed for you within the project guidance document specific to your standard. That'll be found there embedded within our toolkits. Okay, so we'll just give it another minute to see if we do have any final questions coming through. So we do have one about the presentation. So for the presentation, yeah, you will be just giving a bit of a recap of what you've done as part of your project. So you'll be given an overview of that project. In some of them as well, there are certain things that you may need to include as well. So it might be a focus on work that you've done with stakeholders or something like that. But again, within our toolkit, it will include exactly what you need to cover within that presentation. And you can also choose to include things that you feel maybe were a little bit weaker within your project report and that you might find it a little bit easier to talk about in a presentation.
So there are a couple of queries around the acronym that I used earlier today. So I do apologise. It's VARCS. So it's VARCS and it stands for validity, authenticity, reliability, currency and sufficiency. And again, a full breakdown can be found in the evidence requirements document. So please have a look through that and it'll give you a better breakdown in more detail on what that means.
Okay, so on behalf of myself and Danielle, we'd just like to thank everyone for your time today and joining us. It's been absolutely fantastic hearing and answering your questions, and we hope that you found this session really, really useful. As we said before, we will be uploading this webinar to our YouTube channel, and we'll also be sharing the slides with everybody as well. Just to recap, all of the information that you'll need that is specific to your standard is available within our toolkits. And all the additional documentation that you'll need, such as our amplification document, referencing table and project guidance document, is embedded within that toolkit. So if you haven't received that already, then please speak to your training provider to get your hands on that. So we are going to end it there for today. So I think we're giving everybody about 10 minutes of the time back. So we hope that you have a lovely rest of the day, and it's been great to see everybody.
Thank you very much.